without further ado here, getting into our first segment of the day, we are going to be covering the Celtics win last night against the Pacers to take a 2-0 series lead and really take control of this series in general. This was a game that really coming out of the gates, I thought the first quarter was ugly for the Celtics, where it did feel like, for as much talk as we've heard over the past few days about the Celtics not stepping up in game twos and letting some of these opportunities sort of slide, this was a game where the Celtics had to come out on top of their stuff, mentally be prepared for this game, and really it was Jaylen Brown who did answer the call in this instance, where he helped lead the Celtics to this 126-110 win as he scored 40 points in this game and really was just unstoppable outside of, again, that little bit of a quiet first quarter. Brown, 40 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists. He was 14 of 27 from the field, so a 40-point night on over 50% shooting. He was also 4 of 10 from 3, which was encouraging because the Celtics had been having a little bit of some problems from the three-point line. We're going to dive into that when we get into Jayson Tatum as well, but for Brown, it was interesting coming off of the All-NBA selections that were announced in the previous day. That was on Wednesday. Jaylen Brown did not make any of the teams. He was third team last year, and I thought he had a very good case to be third team this year as well. Now, ultimately, he falls short behind guys like Devin Booker and Tyrese Haliburton, of course, of the Indiana Pacers. Now, Jaylen Brown gave some pretty cold-hearted quotes in terms of this idea of, it's funny because Jayson Tatum, of course, is the one that, idolizes Kobe as much as he does and sort of tries to put on that persona a little bit at times, but this was a pretty Kobe-esque quote from Jaylen Brown. Said, "We're 2 games away from the finals. I don't got the time to give an F," in regards to the All-NBA selection. Maybe he used it as motivation, maybe he didn't. Either way, he was just sort of fixated on himself, making sure that he was locked into this game, and locked in he was. He was incredible. Again, we're seeing this two-way effort from him. It was really incredible, but it seems like every single Celtics game we watch, it is Jayson Tatum who is a little bit of the point of conversation, because as we know, at least in my eyes, I think that it should be sort of a universal sentiment, but I know that it's not for everybody. Jayson Tatum is a top 10 player in the world in the NBA, and that being said, we do have these moments with him where it just seems like he isn't, fully locked in. And it seemed like this was a game, like I talked about earlier, in terms of the mental side of these types of opportunities for the Celtics. If there was ever a time to come out and have a dominant performance, everybody in the world was talking about, oh, well, the Celtics don't show up to game 2. This would have been the time for Jayson Tatum to step up, and yet he had a really bad first half, actually. And, I don't typically throw the word bad around quite as much as other people do, but that's what he was. And Tatum, he had a good second half, and even some stuff that sort of goes beyond the stat sheet in terms of being the focal point of the offense, drawing extra attention and making the right basketball plays. But that wasn't even the case in the first half, where he was, I believe, just 1 of 7 from the field. And he, like I mentioned, mentally, it just didn't seem like he was fully there. He had a ton of success in overtime of game 1 of taking on these size mismatches and getting himself to the rim, but yet again, the shot selection with Jayson Tatum is such a frustrating part of his game, because we know how good of a player he is, but it seems like he's almost reluctant sometimes to go to his strengths. And no, maybe it's not the most exciting style of play when you're going to the rim every single time, but he's effective with it. And instead, he decides to settle for these three-point shots, where ultimately it is interesting because you look at the box score, 23 points, 6 rebounds, 5 assists. He was just one shot short of 50% from the field. He was 9 of 20. So you look down in a bad Jayson Tatum game and he is able to put up these types of stats. But again, the defensive effort that just didn't necessarily seem there as well. He seemed unprepared on that end, and he just continues to settle for these 3-pointers, and feels like we should be due for him to actually have a good 3-point shooting game, but he's really been struggling throughout the course of this postseason, just 26.6% from 3, and Jayson Tatum, in my eyes, has never been an elite 3-point shooter. There was definitely a stretch during some of the middle months of the regular season where it seemed like announcers, when the Celtics were on national TV, talked about how elite Tatum is from the 3-point line, but that's really not his game. That being said, he still shot just under 38% from 3 for the regular season, but that really hasn't been his game. And we saw during the offseason he puts on all this type of weight, and it shows up when he does choose to drive to the rim, but he's still kind of stuck up on trying to find that 3-point shot. And it's not that he's incapable of doing so. When the Celtics went to the finals in 2022, and listen, we know how that series against the Warriors went, but Jayson Tatum was absolutely the number one option throughout that postseason run, and he shot 39% from 3 on 8 attempts. So he is absolutely capable of doing so, but he seems to get too caught on to that idea, and at times I do think it can definitely hurt the Celtics. But ultimately, for this game as a whole, I thought this was one of the most impressive defensive performances by the Celtics all season long, and the Pacers end up with 110 points, but that is a prolific offense, the number 1 offensive rating in NBA history, and they did a phenomenal job really against everybody except for Pascal Siakam, who got blazing hot at the end of the second quarter and early in the third there. But outside of that, there really wasn't anybody on the Pacers that was able to sort of muck up the Celtics defense too much. They went on a 20-0 run at one point, the Celtics did, in the second quarter, and even after that, that's when Pascal really got himself going and the Pacers actually pulled themselves back into this game. But part of that is due to the fact that we did not get a good Tyrese Haliburton game. He had 10 points, 8 assists, took just 8 shots, and ultimately he did end up leaving in the third quarter with a hamstring injury, which becomes a little bit of the topic of conversation with this game and in general. Now, I want to say this wasn't a good Tyrese Haliburton game to begin with. Like I said, there was tons of stagnancy on offense. Now, when the Celtics went on that 20-0 run in the second quarter, Tyrese Haliburton was on the bench. So I'm not trying to dump all over him, but we just see this sort of Jekyll Hyde effect with him where sometimes he comes out, and especially coming off of Game 1, where down the stretch of that game, it seemed like time and time again, he was able to get Al Horford in a switch and take advantage there. That was not the case in this game, and credit the Celtics defense for making the adjustments necessary to do so. Instead of having Al Horford on Miles Turner, they put him on Pascal Siakam instead, which made a difference because Miles Turner, great player. He was killing the Celtics in the first half of Game 1, but he's somebody who I always had a ton of faith in, and he's still a very, very solid player. But part of the issue with him is he really can't take advantage of size mismatches in the post, and he's been able to do so against Derek White up to this point, but even Drew Holiday, he hasn't been able to move him as well. Jaylen Brown was actually the primary on Miles Turner in this game, and Miles really struggled as a whole. Just 3 of 7 from the field, 4 turnovers. They made things extremely difficult on the entry passes trying to get it into him, and he just wasn't able to convert. So, again, I think the Celtics made adjustments as we continue to see. As much as he's not everybody's favorite coach, I still don't think that he's a perfect coach, but Joe Mazzulla is learning from some of his mistakes that we've seen from last postseason into this. So, As for the Tyrese Haliburton conversation here, super unfortunate to see. He left in that third quarter with a left hamstring injury. He missed 10 games during the middle part of the season with a left hamstring injury. So that is a concern. Rick Carlisle talked about that Tyrese Haliburton was dealing with some soreness at halftime when the team met. So this is not a very good sign for Tyrese Haliburton, and it is extremely unfortunate for this Pacers team, who did feel like they still stood somewhat of a chance against the Celtics. But if he's unable to go, I mean, I don't think there's any chance the Pacers can win this series. The Celtics were going to win anyways in my eyes, but like we saw, Haliburton is just such an important piece of that offense. Now, he also is not a perfect player. The Celtics' best offense up to this point in the series has been attacking him on the defensive side of the ball. So if you're trying to look for any sort of things the Pacers can build off of, again, we still don't know the final status. What is, again, unfortunate for the Pacers is that on this conference final schedule, they are playing every other day. So there's really not much of a rest period whatsoever, added to the fact that both teams are now going to be traveling to Indiana for their game on Saturday, which is already tomorrow night. So that part of it is definitely not ideal. I don't feel good. Again, I never felt good about the Pacers winning this series, but you sort of have to be sitting here after that Game 1 debacle and just feeling like if they were going to have any chance, they sort of let it slip through their fingers. But let me know what your thoughts were, what your takeaways were from this game. Last thing I will say, actually, as well, I mentioned Joe Mazzulla briefly, and I've been calling for it for a bit here, where the Celtics did play a little bit of small ball minutes, just one sort of small thing. Now, it took Luke Cornett dealing with some sort of hand injury, but I've been appalled by the Luke Cornett minutes, frankly, for the Celtics. But they played O'Shea Brissett, a little bit of revenge series for him going against his former team, and I thought his defensive energy was great. Now, there was one possession in the third quarter where the Pacers got multiple offensive rebounds, couldn't convert. Maybe that would be the downside to it. Obviously, inherently, when you go small ball at any time, rebounds and size is the issue, but I liked that the Celtics chose to, play with it a little bit, and something that I'm curious to see if they decide to do moving forward, considering the fact that, like I mentioned, I just don't think that Miles Turner has necessarily the post skills to make the Celtics pay. But again, let me know what your thoughts were in the comments section. We're going to be taking our first break of the show, though, and when we come back on the other side, I want to talk about the Celtics' overall path so far. They've run into a handful of teams with injuries, and this Tyrese Haliburton situation is the latest of that. So, gonna talk about their run to the finals, but stick with us, and we will be right back after this quick break.